and welcome to episode 3 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. My name is Whitney, and if you're a new viewer, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. This is going to be another special episode of the podcast because I'm not talking about a project that I've made for myself, and I'm not talking about a plus size project. But I will have that coming up for episode 4, I promise. My current whip is just taking a long time because it's made with fingering weight, and I haven't used fingering weight yarn in a while. And like I mentioned in my first episode, I'm a slow knitter, so it's taken me quite a while. But I'm almost done, and I will have it finished for episode 4. This episode is going to be all about boyfriend knits. Or I should change that and say partner knits, because these are all items that I have made for my boyfriend Doyle, and I might talk about some things that I'm going to make for him in the future, but I am doing a pattern review this time. I will start off by sharing with you the mug of the episode, and it's another really special mug to me. This little mug is a black cat that my boyfriend Doyle gave to me for my birthday pretty early on in our relationship. It was the first of our birthdays that we were together as a couple, and we hadn't really made anything official yet, but it showed how much he cared that he got me a mug. So cheers. I'm just drinking water today. It's a hot day and I just really wanted water. Cheers. And I'm going to address the elephant in the room because you probably heard him already. My boyfriend and I just got a dog! We are so excited. You can probably hear his claws clicking in the background. I have his bed right here. He's got a toy that he can chew on, but it is very possible that you're gonna hear his clicking claws because he's still a bit of a puppy and he's got lots of energy and he likes to roam around the house a lot. Last weekend, it was Doyle's birthday, and we got the best possible birthday gift for him. We adopted our dog Rooster, and I will share all kinds of pictures while I'm talking so that you can see how adorable he is. He is a chocolate lab mix. He's 6 months old, and we got him from an amazing rescue down in Alabama. It's called New Hope Rescue, and Rooster traveled over 3,000 kilometers to get to us. He traveled about 1,850 miles. So he had a long journey to get to us, and we are just so grateful to everyone at New Hope and everyone who helped out with getting up to us here in Canada. We found him a couple months ago. You might be able to see him in the background. He's sniffing at Bennett, who is right here. So you might see Rooster pop up in the background. If not, I'm going to share all kinds of pictures. So we first saw a post about Rooster on New Hope's Facebook page back in July, and something about him just stood out. Something clicked. He was the one, and we had been on the look for an animal, for a dog to adopt for a little while. We had a dog previously, but unfortunately he passed away. And it did take us a while to get over that, to get ready to open our hearts again to another dog. And when we saw Rooster's picture online, we knew he was the one. So we contacted the rescue and we put our names down. We wanted him, and fortunately for us, no one else had expressed interest in Rooster, so we were the only candidates. And because we were repeat adopters of this organization, they already greenlit us. There was no problems. The only time we ran into problems was with the closure of the US-Canadian border right now because of the COVID restrictions. So we had quite the hop, skip, and a jump to try and get him here. But long story short, he is here. He's in his forever home, and we could not be happier. We are just so much in love with him, and it's so wonderful. I'm just kind of tearing up right now thinking about how much we were looking forward to getting him and how amazing everyone was that helped get him to us. And We just love him so much. I know the name's kind of funny. Hi, Bennett. You coming in? The name Rooster is kind of a funny name, but there is a story behind it. My boyfriend Doyle loves chickens, and hi, Bennett. He had always wanted to have chickens on his property, but he just hadn't gotten around to getting them by the time that I moved in. And when I moved in and we started to talk about it, I said, absolutely not. I don't want chickens, mainly because they bring other animals, and where we live, those other animals include rats, raccoons, coyotes, all kinds of things that I did not want to have to deal with or worry about. So instead of getting chickens, we got a rooster. So that's why Rooster has the name that he does. And he came with that name. We didn't change it. So we just decided we wanted to keep the name because of that story. So we took that big long trip to get Rooster last weekend on Doyle's birthday. But I gave something to Doyle for his birthday that he did not expect. I have been pretty vocal to the people that I know about how much I do not like knitting socks and how I will never knit socks. And I knitted them for him for his birthday, and I knit them in secret. In the springtime, that's when I was discovering all kinds of knitting podcasts, and I discovered Penrose Knits, Laura, who she's just an absolute sweetheart. I love watching her. If you have not seen the Knitting Pickle podcast on YouTube, I highly recommend you check it out. So I first found Laura on YouTube, and then I started following her on Instagram, and she posted an Instagram story showing how to do an Afterthought heel on a sock. And for the longest time when I was thinking about knitting socks, that was the one thing that I was most worried about doing, because a lot of people say that it's very fiddly, it's very tricky, you have to do all kinds of funky things with heel grafting and all weird terms that I didn't understand because I wasn't a sock knitter. But an Afterthought heel was new to me. And the way that Laura did it in the video on her Instagram story, it looked so easy. And I thought, I can do that. I think I can do that. And I thought to myself, well, I don't want any knitted socks for me because I just don't like the feel of hand knitted socks. It's just a personal preference. It's a texture thing. And just, you know, they never stay up on your leg. They always roll down. And I prefer store-bought socks. I know it probably makes me persona non grata as a knitter, but I don't like wearing knitted socks, hand knitted socks. Anyway, I thought, well, if I don't want them for myself, I should make some for Doyle. And this was around like May-ish. His birthday was in September, because I'm recording now in September. And I thought, well, I've got plenty of time. Why don't I knit them at work and keep it a secret? And then I can surprise him for his birthday. And I was just so excited and so invigorated about that. I thought, okay, how can I make this as easy as possible? First, I found a super easy knitting pattern, which is what I'm going to talk about in a minute. And second, I got the Addy Flexi Flips needles, which if you have not heard of these needles and you are a sock knitter, these are really, really good. It combines the easy parts of magic loop, but on DPNs. So I'll show you what I mean. They come in a set of 3. They're all stainless steel. And you'll notice right away there's something funky about them. They are short, pointed needles with a cord in the middle that bends, hence the flexi flip part of them. So these needles are used to knit primarily socks, but you could also use them for mittens or for gloves or anything that requires a very small circumference, even sleeves probably if you need to use smaller needles for a sleeve. But they're great because you cast on and it looks like you're knitting magic loop because you've got half of your stitches on one needle, half of your stitches on the other needle. So it looks like you're knitting a tube flat like you do when you do magic loop. But you're using a third needle similar to how you would use a fourth or a fifth needle when you're knitting on DPNs in the round. So it takes the best part of both of those styles of needles and allows you to use the easy parts of them. You don't have to deal with the hard part. So for example, when you're using DPNs, you're constantly dealing with all these needles sticking out everywhere. And if you're me, you cannot close the gap between your first and last stitches of your round, no matter how hard you try, which is why I don't like using DPNs. And you don't have to deal with the long cord of a magic loop, which also annoying, and also annoying that you have to set up your needles each time you go to do a round, so you've got everything done properly. These make it so easy. And I never thought I would be someone who would say, oh my gosh, knitting socks is so easy. Because it's something that for the longest time I thought was super complicated and very difficult, really fiddly, really tricky. And yeah, I knit a pair of socks. So now that I've shown you the needles, I guess I better show you the socks, because that's what you're here for. I knit the size medium of the trusty toe-up socks by Tanis Fiber Arts. And these are the socks. They are super colorful. They have stretched out, which I will talk about. The yarn is stash yarn, believe it or not. So these are a stash busting project. Also super excited about that. The yarn is K-Zip Knits, who is from Vancouver. And it's her Garibaldi fingering in the color City Splash. And I bought this yarn on my last trip that I took before I met Doyle. I went to Vancouver in fall of 2019, and that's when I went to an adorable little yarn shop called Wet Coast Wools in Vancouver. And the dyer was there, and of course I'm blanking on her name now, but she was really, really friendly, and we were chatting about her yarn and chatting about her dyeing and how she chooses colors and everything like that. And she gave me a lot of insight into how her skeins knit up. And she had a couple samples that were already hanging on the wall of swatches to show you how the different colors knit up in a swatch. And I really was drawn to the ones that wouldn't give you that pooling effect. So you have most of one color and then you have like a stripe of the accent color. I just really didn't want that kind of a look. I wanted something that would be more totally variegated, totally crazy and all over the place. And so I chose this yarn. And at the time I thought, these are just really fun colors. I love the bright yellow, I love the bright blue, I love the green. It just really called to me as a yarn. And then I came home and it sat in my stash because I did a lot of buying on that trip. I also went to Portland on that trip, and I went to so many awesome, awesome yarn stores in Portland, as well as the really awesome store in Vancouver. And because I was traveling, I was only using a carry-on, I bought a lot of single skein, multicolor, variegated skeins of yarn. And when I got home, I thought, what the heck am I gonna do with these now? Because none of the colors went together. Everything was very unique. This is the most unique of all the yarns that I bought. So it just kind of sat in my stash. I'd look at it and I'd feel excited about it because it was so bright, but I just never had a pattern in mind for it. And I think at one point I put it on my queue in Ravelry for a shawl, just like a basic shawl. But then I never got around to it because I'm not much of a shawl person. And after that trip, I kind of swore off buying single skeins of fingering weight yarn that are multicolored because I realized I don't know what to do with them because I keep buying different ones that don't go together. So I ended up just having it in my stash and sitting there for a while. And when I was thinking about what yarn to use for Socks for Doyle, I knew I wanted to take something out of my stash because, like I mentioned, there's all kinds of it. And I knew I had options in my stash. So when I was doing some research into what kind of yarn to use for socks, chatted with some friends of mine that are also knitters, and decided that superwash merino with some nylon in it was the best option. And in my stash, the skein of yarn that I had that fit, of the skeins of yarn that I had, the one that best fit that was the Garibaldi sock, or Garibaldi fingering. It has 25% nylon and 75% superwash merino wool, which means I can chuck these in the laundry. They can go in the washer and they can go in the dryer, and I don't have to worry about things happening to them. Although they've stretched out, so it would be nice if they could shrink, but they won't because they're superwash. Anyway, let me talk about the pattern. So I chose to do the Trusty Toe Up Socks by Tanis Fiber Arts. And for those of you who aren't sock knitters, toe up means that you cast on the stitches at the toe and then you go upwards towards the cuff. You use a special cast on so that you literally cannot see the cast on stitches. They are completely invisible. So once you cast on your toe, you do your increases down towards your foot and to get to the size that you need. And then you knit for a while until you get to the point that you need to make the heel. So I thought I was going to do an Afterthought heel because that's what Laura from Penrose Knits did, and she made it look so easy. But then I read the other heel. The other heel option in the pattern. And the other heel option was a German short row heel, which I know how to do German short rows because I use them all the time in sweaters to make the back of the neck higher than the front of the neck. And I thought, well, German short rows are so easy. I can do that. Why don't I do the German short row heel? Then I don't have to worry about doing an Afterthought heel. I'll just do the German short row heel. So I did that. Again, way easier than I thought it was going to be. I watched a couple videos online to make sure that I wouldn't have any big holes on the sides because I heard that that was an issue with some sock heels. So I don't have any big holes, so that's great. And once you finish doing your heel, you then just knit up until you're happy with the length of the cuff, stopping about 1.5 inches from where you want it to end, and then you just do 1 by 1 ribbing until you get to the end. And I chose to do a tubular bind off, or it's also known as an Italian bind off or an Italian sewn bind off. And as you can see, they're nice and stretchy. They are a little too stretchy because they have stretched out. That could be my issue because maybe my needles were too big. The whole sock is a little too big. Hi, Bennett, welcome back. You gonna lay down? Come on, lay down. Lay down. Good kitty. Good kitty. So the whole sock is a little too big, and that is my own fault because I did not measure Doyle's foot or leg before I made these socks because they were a surprise. So what I did instead was I looked online on Ravelry to see what the other male knitters had done or what other knitters had done for their partners who were men, because I wanted it to fit a man, not a woman. And it was a unisex sock pattern, so by Bennett, so it could have been used for anyone. Anyway, I chose to go with the size medium. I forget how many stitches that was all the way around, but it ended up being quite big. The main problem with the fit of the socks is the way that the heel fits his foot. And I'm gonna do some research and see why it is that that just didn't fit right. So when he put on the socks to try them on when I gave them to him and then wore them for the rest of the evening, the heel just kept slipping down and just sort of like gathered underneath his foot. And that's not very comfortable if you're going to actually wear the socks. So I was a little disappointed that they didn't fit, but I was pre-warned by one of my knitting friends that the first pair of socks that you knit never fit. So don't worry if they don't fit, because they never do. It's just a first sock experience, apparently. So I was warned that they probably wouldn't fit him, especially because I hadn't measured him. I just sort of went off what length foot would fit his shoe size. And I, like I mentioned, I just chose the medium size for the width. And so yeah, they do not fit, but he said that he is going to wear them around the house in the winter when it's nice and cool, because he does not like slippers. He likes socks. And a cozy pair of hand knit socks are nicer than a pair of store-bought socks in his mind. So he absolutely loves them, and he was so surprised and so shocked when I gave them to him. I have video footage of when I gave them to him for his birthday, and he has given me the go-ahead. I can include it in my video, so I will cut to that now.
Is this? It's knitted socks. That's what I thought. You finally made me knitted socks.
I knitted you a pair of socks.
You commissioned it.
No, I knit them myself.
What?
I knit them myself.
What? You knitted a pair of
did.
Socks? You hate knitting socks.
I know. I did it for you.
Oh, but what's all this?
That's the band that was around the yarn. That's how people display knitted socks.
You knitted. When did you do this?
I did it at work.
That's cheating. How? When?
Over the past few months.
Oh my lord.
I started them right before lockdown, and then...
You didn't have to knit me socks. I love it.
Because you always were teasing me about how I would never knit you a pair of socks.
How was the process?
It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, actually.
Aww. They're beautiful.
You can... It's just taped. You can open it up.
Yeah? I could probably just... No.
It was very hard to get them in there.
Did you tape it and then put them in?
Yes.
Oh wait, it looks like it's just tearing. There we go. Oh, these look cozy. Love it.
So there you saw Doyle opening his socks for his birthday and how excited he was to get them. So I don't have my exact yardage of how much yarn I used for the socks, but the Garibaldi fingering is one of those like 437 yards of yarn. It was a 100 gram skein, and I still have a healthy amount of the yarn left. So you could definitely get away making the size medium with just one skein of sock yarn or one skein of fingering weight yarn. It's a really, really beautiful yarn, and I'm so glad I got to use it to make something that Doyle will really, really appreciate, and it means the yarn is no longer sitting in my stash waiting to become something. I'll hang on to the extras because one day I will do a really big stash busting project where I knit with all kinds of leftovers and mini skeins and whatnot to create something crazy. I think it'll be a blanket, but I'll make it at some point, so I hang on to my leftovers for that reason. So I still have some of this left. The socks were not the first thing that I knitted for Doyle. The first thing that I knit for him, which is, it's my go-to pattern for any amount of, like, small amount of yarn that I have left. It's my go-to gift too, whenever I need to just give a small gift to someone that's hand knitted, if they are knit worthy. I will talk about that in a minute. But I knitted him, I started it when we were on a trip for his birthday, and I finished it right before Christmas. It is Jason's cashmere hat, and it is the best cable knit hat with a little brim, folded brim. I have one of my little personal tags there, I can pop in a picture here of what that tag looks like up close because I can't show it to you from here because it's such tiny writing. It's my logo that I use for my podcast, Knitted by Whitney. So it's a little skein of yarn with a little heart and some needles. Anyway, I have it on little tags that I put on anything that I knit as a gift for somebody else. Anyway, I knit this for Doyle as the first thing that I wanted to knit for him because he only had plain black hats and he kind of wanted something warmer, something cozier. Obviously he knew that I knitted, so we talked about it and I showed him this pattern because I'd knit it many times before, and I asked him if he liked it and he said he did. So we went to a yarn store and I had him pick out yarn that he liked. It was very important to me that he picked up the yarn because I wanted him to like the hat. So him not being a yarn pro, I pointed him in the direction of the yarn that would work for this pattern, and then I had him choose which of the colors that he likes. And he chose this gorgeous yarn. It is Universal Yarns DK Superwash Tweed. Oh, sorry. Universal Yarn Deluxe DK Tweed Superwash. There's a mouthful. So he chose this yarn, and it's in the color 405 Pine. You may hear some snoring in the background. That's Rooster. So Doyle picked out this yarn, and I used it to knit his hat. And they're big balls. These balls have, what does it say here? For 100 grams, you get 284 yards. So this is a pretty big ball. And I only used, I want to say, maybe less than 2/3 of the ball, but certainly more than a half of the ball to make his hat. And he loved it so much, he wore it all last winter, and he wanted a matching scarf for it. So because I still had some of the yarn left, we went back to the store and I got a second ball because this is definitely not enough to make a scarf. It's not even enough to make a cowl. So we bought another ball of it, and I'm going to be making the Turas Celtic Scarf. I hope I pronounced that right. It is a pattern by Knititude, who is my favorite designer of all knitting. I absolutely love her stuff. I will knit any of her patterns basically. And I'm so glad that Doyle picked up that scarf pattern because I love supporting Chantal. I love knitting her patterns, and it's gonna look so freaking pretty in this just pure tweedy green yarn. And it's gonna look really nice on Doyle. This is my go-to hat pattern. I make it all the time whenever I need to give anything to anyone. In fact, I was in the middle of doing a test knit at the time, and my mom asked me to make her a knit hat because she was doing a lot of walking in the winter because it was another COVID lockdown where we live, and at the time she and my aunt were getting out to walk together on a trail near her house, and she just needed a hat because she didn't have anything that came down to cover her ears, so her ears were getting cold. Of course, I just whipped up one of these because it took, I think, 2 days, which was a lot for me. Like, that's very fast for me. But I wanted to get it done quickly, so I go back to my test knit. You may have noticed that all of the things that I have knit for Doyle are accessories. And some of you may know why, some of you may not know why. Have you ever heard of the curse of the boyfriend sweater? If you have, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't heard of this, let me enlighten you. There is a supposed curse that if you start to knit a sweater for a boyfriend or for a significant other in general, for your partner, there is a curse that if you start the sweater, they will leave you by the time you finish the sweater. And I'd already heard of this when I discovered a knitting book called The Curse of the Boyfriend Sweater by Alana Okun. And it was a series of essays written about crafting, knitting specifically. but her first chapter was about how she was plagued by the curse of the boyfriend sweater. She had had multiple partners throughout her life where she had started knitting a sweater for them, and her relationship would end before she had a chance to finish the sweater. And I remember reading that when I was still single, and I thought to myself, well, not gonna play around with that. And now that I'm with someone who is incredibly caring and incredibly loving, and someone who we are very much in a committed relationship, I don't want to give the curse of the boyfriend sweater as much power over me as it used to have. That leads me to talk about the first sweater that I'm going to knit Doyle. And this sweater is it's going to be very, very special. It's probably going to be the most special thing that I knit for Doyle. Over the past weekend, funny enough, on his birthday, Red Door Fiber Studio did her Court of Thorns and Roses yarn pre-order. And if you haven't heard of a Court of Thorns and Roses, it is one of the best, and I mean best, fantasy series that I have ever read. The second book, A Court of Mist and Fury, is by far and away one of my top favorite books of all time. So if you are at all into fantasy, I highly, highly, highly recommend this series. I don't have my books with me right now because I've lent them to a friend who is currently on the second book, and she is now understanding why I love these books so much. But when I found out that Red Door Fiber Studios was designing yarn based on characters from these books, I freaked out. I was so excited, like so excited. And when she started releasing all the different colorways leading up to the day of the pre-order, she released a colorway based on the main male character in the series, and it was just the perfect yarn. So when I saw this yarn, I knew I had to make a sweater for him out of this yarn. And it definitely helped that it was purple yarn, which is his favorite color. So it just felt like it made sense. It was the perfect yarn. And I've chosen to knit for him the Montrealer by Designs by Dells. And I'm super, super, super excited to knit this for Doyle. I don't really want to show what that yarn looks like because it's not available anymore, and I really don't want to get anyone's hopes up about that yarn. The reason that I've decided that I'm going to knit a sweater for Doyle is because he is incredibly knit-worthy. And I want to talk about that for a minute. When I was knitting my mom's sweater last year for Christmas, I watched Anushka from the Crimson Stitcheries video about making knitted gifts. I've been a follower of Anushka's for a while. She's a really great knitting podcaster. I also highly recommend her videos. And she did a video about whether knitted gifts are worth it. And not worth it as something to give, but are they worth it to make? And watching that video, Anushka had a lot of really great insights. And one of the things that she mentioned is make sure that the person you're giving the gift to is knit worthy. And the way that you define whether someone is knit worthy is entirely up to you. It's your decision. But the basics of someone who is knit worthy is someone who's going to appreciate all of the time that you've spent working on this project. Because any of us who are knitters, we know a hand knitted hat is never something that's just going to be a one and done, oh, that only took me an hour project. No, these take multiple hours. Unless you're me and you're trying to get it done as quickly as possible so you can get back to your test knit, in which case you give yourself really bad wrist pain doing it as quickly as possible. So yes, make sure the person that you're giving it to knows how much time you spent on the project and knows how valuable that time was to you. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is this someone who is going to treat the garment the way that it has to be treated in order to make it last? Do they know that wool has to be hand washed and laid flat to dry? Are they going to be someone who's going to chuck it in the wash and it's going to felt and that's going to be the end of it? Or are they going to treat it properly? You can always give people little cards with the instructions on how to take care of their knits, but it's up to them if they follow those instructions. And then the third basic criteria of making sure the person you're giving something to is knitworthy is, do you know that they're going to appreciate getting a hand-knitted garment? Because not everyone will. So those are the basic criteria that Anishka put forward to decide whether somebody is knitworthy. And for me, Doyle hits all of those because of course he understands how much time goes into this because he's with me while I'm working on them. He can see how long it takes me to knit a sweater or even just a hat. So he knows how much time and effort I've put into making it. 2, it's going to be properly taken care of because I live here, so I can do it. I actually hand wash all of our sweaters. And 3rd, I know he's going to appreciate a hand knitted garment because to him, that's me showing how much I love him. Because I'm taking this time to make something really beautiful for him, using a good quality yarn, using a beautiful product, and he can see how worth it is to have something like that. So that is why I have decided to knit Doyle a sweater. And I'm going to ignore the curse of the boyfriend sweater because I don't have anything to worry about with Doyle because he is my person. He's the person I'm going to be with for the rest of my life, and he deserves a hand-knitted sweater. And it's probably not going to be the only sweater that I give him, but I wanted to start with the most special sweater that I could possibly knit for him. And everything just seems to be coming together because I found the perfect pattern, and I found the perfect yarn, and what it represents is really important to me. So that is why he's going to get a Montrealer hoodie. And now for the final segment of the podcast, and that is my book recommendations. I picked up from the library A Stash of One's Own by Clara Parks. Now this is an anthology of stories and essays collected by Clara Parks from different people in the fiber community. Anyone who has a story to tell about a stash of yarn. And I have a couple quotes that I want to share with you because I have absolutely loved reading this book. Because, like I mentioned in my first podcast, I struggle with the size of my stash. But not just the amount. I was uncomfortable by the fact that I had so much yarn that I didn't have any plans for, and I couldn't think of anything to do with it. So reading this book has been really helpful for me to think about my stash in different ways. And, I don't mean for this book to be sort of like, here, read this, it will solve all your problems and make you have all kinds of great excuses for why you have so much yarn. That's not what this book is about. This book is just a bunch of people sharing stories about why they have a stash or how they feel about their stash, or in some cases, why people choose not to have a stash. But I just found it to be a really enlightening read, and I really enjoyed the different stories that people had to share, and there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom in this book. So I'm going to share with you 3 of my favorite quotes from this book. The first one is by Stephanie Pearl McPhee. A lot of people know her as the Yarn Harlot, which is an awesome name to go by. She writes, "Most of my yarn is for knitting, but some of it has a more complicated destiny as support staff. It is there to make me want to knit. I have no intention of ever knitting it, but it's earning the real estate it takes up with how it makes me feel about knitting. It is the textile artist's equivalent of a painting hung on the wall. It is there to be beautiful and to help me dream of possibility." That one really resonated with me because, like I mentioned, I have had issues with having yarn that doesn't have a purpose. It has made me feel uncomfortable having that in my stash. But when I read that line by Stephanie, it made me think, and I realized some of those yarns that I don't have plans for are the most beautiful yarns that I have in my stash. And when I go to look at my stash, those are the ones that just make me feel really good and make me feel very creative. And inspire me to come up with new plans for yarn that I have in my stash. It may not be a plan for that specific yarn, but I start getting out there and researching different patterns, or I look at different yarns in my stash sitting together and think, oh, I never thought of putting those together, but they look pretty good actually. And then I have all kinds of more creative ideas. So I really love that Stephanie took what I was sort of thinking in the back of my mind but hadn't really voiced and said it out loud in a book. And it made so much sense. And I felt a little better about the fact that I had those yarns in my stash and they weren't being used. But it's okay, because they had this other purpose. They're there to be beautiful and make me want to knit. The next quote I'm going to share is by Sue Schenkel, who she's a knitter as a hobby, but her main job is as a clinical social worker, according to the book at least. And I loved her section because she brought a lot of analytical thinking to having a stash and thinking about how you feel about your stash. So her section was really great because she asked you about questions to do with your stash. And you write down your answers, and then you analyze your answers, and that will help you understand how you really feel about your stash and what you need to do about that if you're not happy with it. So I have a quote from her. Technically I have two quotes from her because they're from different sections of her part of the book. The first one is this. So what bothers you about your stash? If you buy yarn and then feel horrible about it, you're defeating the entire endeavor. There's no shame in loving your stash. None. And the second quote, which is related to the first one. Understanding why you have your stash and having no shame in loving it will help you enjoy it even more. So I love reading this section after I'd already read Stephanie's section, because first I realized I have this yarn that doesn't have a plan, but that's okay because it serves a purpose. And then I read Sue's section, and loving my stash, whether it's being used or not, is okay. That's the whole point. If you have something and you love it, there's no reason to get rid of it. And if you don't love your stash, then get rid of it. And the last quote I'm going to share with you is from Clara herself, the editor of the book. Clara says, you should be able to look at your stash and feel inspired to create. But if you can't find anything among heaps of stuff, if you can't see your yarn, your stash has stopped working. It no longer inspires creativity. So that was a nice one to sort of come to as well after reading those first two. And there's all kinds of nuggets of information and really great inspiration in this book. But those are the three authors that stood out to me the most in this book. And I liked coming to Clara's last because there is a line that you need to draw between what's making you happy and what's overwhelming. And for me, I think I thought I had been at a point where my stash was overwhelming, but after reading Clara's section, I realized, wait, the parts of my stash that I really love don't make me feel overwhelmed. I'm still in the love section with those yarns. So it's okay to keep them. And having a large stash is relative to different people. What I think is a large stash, you might think is a small stash. And people have different amounts that they're comfortable keeping in a stash. I have a knitting friend who is very uncomfortable having any stash. So she tries to have as little as possible. I'm the opposite. I have quite a bit. And I feel good. Now, after reading this book, I feel better about it. I was feeling a little uncomfortable with it. Now I feel much better about it. So I really loved this book for those reasons. But I also loved it because there's a lot of wonderful stories in here about different people and their relationships with yarn. A lot of it has to do with, beloved family members or really exciting jobs that they undertook. And it was just a really, really fun read. So if you at all are interested in reading about yarn stashing or other people's opinions about yarn stashing, pick this up. It's really fun. And that concludes episode 3 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. Again, it was another special episode. This one was about boyfriend knits or partner knits or significant other knits. And next episode, episode 4, I promise it's going to be about the next thing that I've knitted for myself, and it is a size inclusive pattern, and I'm very excited to share it with you, but I'm not finished yet. I'm almost done. I only have a little bit left to work on, and I can't wait to share it with you. So that is all I have left to say. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye.